I've been sleeping with your partner for months, and telling you now feels so liberating." Victoria's words exploded like gunshots in the air of the penthouse apartment in Miami's glittering Brickell district. Dressed in a $5,000 Valentino dress, a platinum diamond necklace sparkling at her throat, her eyes burned with the thrill of victory. She expected her husband Jimmy to shrink away quietly as he always did, or to roar with any reaction that would signal she had the upper hand. But Jimmy simply continued cleaning the German drafting pen his father had left him with an old chamois cloth, his movements as precise and rhythmic as they had been every day for the last 20 years. The only sound in the room was the faint whisper of the cloth against the metal, echoing the endless battleship gray sky visible through the panoramic window. This silence unnerved Victoria. The declaration of victory she had rehearsed so many times got stuck in her throat. "Why aren't you angry?" she asked, almost unconsciously, a hint of fear replacing the taunt in her voice. Jimmy finally looked up, his gaze cutting through her carefully constructed defenses, and answered calmly, "Because your lover doesn't know that his company is now mine, and his beautiful wife is too." Victoria's blood ran cold. She didn't recognize this man. The quiet worker she had looked down on for 20 years was gone, and in his place stood a stranger with the eyes of a bald eagle from the high Rockies, serene, piercing, and ready to dive and tear its prey apart. 3 months earlier, a storm was brewing. On the construction site of the Horizon Tower near Port Miami, workers scrambled under the yellowish glow of temporary lights. The National Weather Service had just issued a severe weather alert. In 3 hours, a storm with near-hurricane force winds would slam the entire coast. The concrete pour for the 12th floor had to be finished before the rain hit, or the entire schedule would be set back by at least 3 weeks. This would trigger penalty clauses in the contract, causing losses in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. "5 minutes faster," Jimmy exclaimed, standing on the scaffolding, a two-way radio gripped tightly in his right hand and blueprints in his left. "Make sure the angle of the formwork on the south side is perfect, or the whole structure will be compromised." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an unquestionable authority. It wasn't an authority built on yelling and intimidation, but on the professional experience and personal charisma earned over 20 years on construction sites. From a laborer who came from a poor neighborhood to a project director managing hundreds, Jimmy knew every possible point of failure in a build. "Boss, the weather service says the rain is coming sooner." "The wind's already picking up," the site supervisor shouted, his voice thick with tension. With eagle eyes, Jimmy scanned every corner of the site, his mind racing, calculating the time needed for each stage, potential risk points, and contingency plans. Adjust the pouring sequence. Start from the northeast corner and work your way southwest. That way, when the wind hits, the completed sections will act as a barrier. Assign 2 crews to reinforce the temporary barriers on the west side. The rest of you, get waterproof tarps ready to go. The workers immediately sprang into action like a well-trained army. The wind intensified, dust dancing in the air, and the workers squinted as they powered through. The concrete pump truck roared, and gray concrete flowed like lifeblood, continuously feeding the building's skeleton. 10 minutes after the last concrete truck completed its pour, the heavens opened and the torrential rain arrived as predicted. The workers cheered as they took cover under temporary shelters. But Jimmy remained in the rain, personally checking that every critical area was protected, every joint sealed, and every drain was working properly. A young worker offered him a rain jacket. "Boss, you're going to catch a cold." Jimmy took the jacket but didn't put it on right away. "Do you know why we were able to finish before the storm?" The young worker shook his head. "Because we all understand our responsibility and we're willing to give it our all. That's the secret to success. There are no shortcuts, only responsibility and perseverance." What he didn't know was that on the very same night, at the Coral Gables Country Club, his partner Julian was telling this story in a completely different way. The Coral Gables Country Club was the gathering spot for Miami's high society. Membership required not only steep fees, but also family history and social status. In the club's restaurant, crystal chandeliers glittered over elegant silverware and china, while waiters glided silently, serving the finest Napa Valley wines to the guests. Julian was a regular here. Dressed in a custom Brioni suit, the latest Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, He radiated the confident aura of a successful man. So I told the team, I don't care what the forecast says, we are completing this pour today. Julian raised his glass, speaking with a dramatic flair as if narrating an epic battle. I personally designed the pouring plan and reassigned the staff. The construction industry is like that. Decision-making is more important than anything else. While others are still hesitating, a true leader has already taken action. The guests made sounds of admiration. Some even applauded. Victoria looked at Julian with adoration and added at the perfect moment, Julian always stays so calm in a crisis. That's why A&J Construction has grown into an industry leader in such a short time. Julian smiled with satisfaction, discreetly placing his hand on Victoria's bare back, his fingers gently stroking her skin. Victoria trembled slightly but didn't pull away. They exchanged a knowing look, a secret glint in their eyes. Across the table, Catherine quietly listened to this story she had heard at least 3 times before. Her gaze occasionally drifted from her husband, Julian, to a colonial-era painting on the wall, a landscape of old Florida with the same characteristic gray sky. Catherine was a woman of distinct qualities, able to draw glances without needing extravagant adornments. She wore an exquisitely tailored navy blue dress, her hair styled simply but elegantly. Unlike Victoria's flashy beauty, Catherine's was understated, like an abstract painting that requires careful appreciation. As the director of the Window in Time Gallery in the Wynwood Arts District, she possessed a sharp eye for art and a keen business mind. "My husband always presents himself as a hero, doesn't he?" Catherine suddenly commented to the woman beside her, a barely perceptible tone of irony in her voice. "His stories get more vivid every time he tells them." The woman smiled, unsure how to respond to the obviously sarcastic remark. Catherine noticed her discomfort and elegantly changed the subject. "That painting is interesting, don't you think? The artist captured that endless gray sky, but also gave it a special glow. It reminds me of an old saying, in the deepest gray, you find the purest light." Late that night, Jimmy finally returned to the penthouse in Brickell. He opened the door quietly, not wanting to wake Victoria if she was already asleep. The apartment was exquisitely decorated, blending modernism with classic American elements, designed by Victoria herself. Yet, Jimmy never felt this place was truly a home. It felt more like a carefully arranged showroom, a place to impress guests, not a sanctuary to live in. The living room lights were on. Victoria was sitting on the imported Italian leather sofa, a fashion magazine in her hands, but her eyes weren't focused on the pages. "You're back," she said without looking up, her voice deliberately cold. "Yeah, there were some issues at the site that needed attention," Jimmy replied, setting down his briefcase and heading to the bathroom. His shirt and pants were stained with mud and cement, and his hair was messy from the rain. "You absolutely reek of cement," Victoria grimaced, closing the magazine and finally looking up at him. Her eyes reflected a mix of disgust and disappointment. "I already told the housekeeper not to wait for you for dinner. You made me look ridiculous at the Martinez's dinner party, you know? When everyone arrived with their partners, I had to face all that gossip alone." Jimmy stopped and turned to his wife. "I'm sorry, but you know how important today was. If we had missed the window for the pour, the entire project would have been delayed. That would have meant huge penalties and damage to our reputation." "I don't understand why you have to go to the site personally," Victoria said, getting up and walking to the bar to pour herself a glass of red wine. "You're not some junior engineer just starting out. You're one of the owners of A&J. You should be making decisions in the office, not working in the mud with the laborers." Jimmy sighed tiredly. This was a conversation they had had countless times. "I believe that details determine success or failure. If I don't go and see for myself, how can I be sure everything is going according to plan? Besides, the workers need to see me facing the difficulties alongside them. It's important for morale." Victoria shook her head, taking a sip of red wine. "Julian doesn't need to do that. He knows how to manage and delegate. Tonight at the club, he told everyone how you completed the pour, and they were all impressed with his leadership." Jimmy didn't respond to the obvious jab. He just said, "I'm going to take a shower." "By the way," Victoria said, as if suddenly remembering something, "next Friday is our wedding anniversary, but I've already made plans with friends to go to a new gallery in Wynwood. You don't mind if we celebrate another day, do you? After all, work is always your priority. Jimmy looked at his wife for a few seconds, then nodded. Sure, no problem. He didn't tell Victoria that he had already made reservations at the Gilded Pelican, the restaurant where they had their first date, a reservation that took him 2 months to secure. He also didn't mention that he had already commissioned a set of handmade silver cutlery, engraved with the vows they exchanged at their wedding. These details seemed to no longer matter, like so many things between them, gradually becoming irrelevant. Monday morning, Jimmy was in his office checking supplier invoices. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the desk piled with documents and blueprints. As a co-founder of a mid-sized construction company, he should have delegated this kind of work to the finance department. But as Victoria complained, he always preferred to do things himself, especially when it came to numbers and details. One invoice caught his eye. It was from a company called Mountain Wind Logistics, charging a port coordination fee that was 30% higher than the market rate. Stranger still, the invoice format was different from the standard template the company normally used, looking as if it had been hastily made. Jimmy frowned, comparing this invoice with several other similar expense documents. Over the past few months, the invoice amounts from Mountain Wind Logistics had been steadily increasing, while the service descriptions were becoming more and more vague. As someone used to precise calculations, this irregularity immediately set off his internal alarms. He took the invoice to the finance department. The head of finance, Linda, was a meticulous middle-aged woman who had worked at A&J for 7 years. Linda, what is this invoice? Why are we paying such a high port coordination fee? And the format looks off, he asked, placing the invoice in front of her. Linda adjusted her glasses and checked the system. Oh, this supplier was specially approved by Mr. Julian. He said this company could provide more efficient service, and although the price is higher, it would help us save time and cut through red tape. She paused, then added, Honestly, I had my doubts about these invoices too, but Mr. Julian said they were a strategic partner and asked us to prioritize their payments. Jimmy noticed that Linda's expression was a bit forced, as if she was hinting at something. Are there other similar cases? He asked in a low voice. Linda hesitated for a moment, then lowered her voice and said, There are several new suppliers that suddenly appeared in the last few months, all personally introduced by Mr. Julian. Their billing patterns are very similar, with rather vague expense descriptions. Jimmy nodded without asking any more questions. Thank you for your honesty, Linda. Please continue with the current process and don't mention our conversation. Back in his office, Jimmy put the invoice aside and fell deep into thought. He and Julian had founded A&J together 15 years ago. In the beginning, they complemented each other. Jimmy handled technology and construction, while Julian took care of marketing and client relations. This division of labor allowed the company to grow steadily in the competitive construction market. However, as the company expanded, so did Julian's ambition. He began to pursue faster growth, higher profits, sometimes even at the expense of the quality standards Jimmy had always upheld. At lunchtime, Julian knocked on Jimmy's office door. Hey buddy, let's grab lunch. I found a new Italian place. They say the chef came straight from Rome, Julian said, leaning against the doorframe with a beaming smile. He was wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, his tie the latest from Hermes. Looking at this charismatic man, Jimmy suddenly realized that despite working together for years, he had never truly gotten to know Julian. Their relationship had always remained on the superficial level of business partners, never deepening into a real friendship. Sure, I'm hungry too, Jimmy said, deciding to put his doubts aside for the moment. Maybe this was an opportunity to get more information. The restaurant was indeed as elegant as Julian had described. The waiters were well trained, and the wine list was as thick as a book. Julian expertly ordered a bottle of a 2009 Super Tuscan, then talked at length about how he met the restaurant owner during a golf tournament. Speaking of golf, Julian said, pouring wine for both of them, there's a major charity tournament in Coral Gables next weekend, with a lot of potential clients. You should definitely come. Jimmy gently swirled his wine glass. Next weekend? I'm afraid I can't. It's my wedding anniversary with Victoria. Julian's expression showed a moment of awkwardness, but he quickly recovered his smile. Oh, wedding anniversary, an important date. Though, Victoria mentioned last night she was going to check out a new gallery, didn't she? Jimmy raised his head, looking directly into Julian's eyes. Yes, she did say that. Did you hear that at the club? Julian was slightly startled, then shrugged. Maybe, you know how it is. There's always chatter at social events. He quickly changed the subject. By the way, how's the Horizon project going? The bank is very satisfied with our progress reports. Jimmy noticed Julian's deliberate change of topic, but decided to play along and talk about work. For the rest of the lunch, they discussed the progress of various projects and future plans. On the surface, they were still business partners in sync, but in Jimmy's heart, a small but persistent doubt was beginning to form. In the following days, Jimmy behaved as usual. He discussed project progress with Julian in meetings, talked with clients, and reviewed construction plans. No one could detect anything unusual in his behavior. But beneath the apparent calm, he had already begun his own investigation. He discreetly examined all the company's financial records from the past 6 months, discovering that, besides Mountain Wind Logistics, there were several similar suppliers that had suddenly appeared in the last 4 months. They all had similar billing patterns with vague service descriptions. These companies received a monthly sum from A&J that already exceeded $100,000, a not insignificant amount. However, when he tried to look up information about these companies online, he found almost nothing. They seemed to exist only on paper, no physical offices, no employees, no history, just a P.O. box and a phone number that was almost never answered. On Saturday morning, when Victoria thought he had gone golfing, Jimmy drove to the Port Miami area. He wore plain work clothes and an old cap, looking like just another port worker. His vehicle wasn't his usual luxury SUV, but a standard pickup truck he only used for visiting remote sites. He found the address for Mountain Wind Logistics that was listed on the invoice. It was an abandoned warehouse near the port with faded walls, boarded-up windows, a large rusty padlock on the iron gate, and weeds growing all around. Obviously, no one had used this place in years, let alone it being the headquarters of an active trading company. Not far away was a makeshift security booth where a middle-aged man was reading a newspaper, a radio beside him broadcasting a local football game. Jimmy didn't go straight over to ask questions. Instead, he went to a small diner nearby, ordered a coffee and a sandwich, and sat in a spot where he could observe the warehouse. He pretended to read the newspaper, but in reality, he was carefully watching for any movement at the warehouse. An hour later, an expensive black Mercedes SUV pulled up in front of the warehouse. Jimmy recognized it as the vehicle Julian's driver, Mark, usually used. A young man got out of the car, greeted the security guard, then unlocked the warehouse padlock and went inside. 20 minutes later, he came out, locked the gate, and drove away with a document envelope in his hand. Jimmy took out his phone and dialed a number. Martin, old friend, remember 3 years ago when you broke your leg on the site and the company's insurance didn't cover everything? Who fronted the medical expenses? Jimmy said in a low but clear voice. I need you to do me a favor about something down at the port. Martin was a foreman who had worked at the port for over 30 years, forced into early retirement by a work injury, but he still maintained extensive contacts in the port area. He owed Jimmy a favor. When he was injured, the company insurance only covered 60% of the medical costs, and Jimmy had personally paid the remaining $40,000 as well as helped his son find a stable job at A&J. 3 days later, Martin brought news. The young man in the SUV was named Chris, and he was the cousin of Julian's personal driver, Mark. There was no real activity at the warehouse, just documents and packages that occasionally went in and out. More importantly, according to the old-timers at the port, the real controller of the warehouse was a distant relative of Julian's, a minor official in the local government. There's one more thing, boss, Martin said in a low voice. I heard Chris recently got drunk at a bar and bragged about his extra income. He said his job was to pick up documents from the warehouse every week, take them to an address in Brickell, and then return other documents to the warehouse. For each trip, he received $1,000 as a tip. Jimmy thanked his old friend and gave him an envelope full of cash. Martin refused it, but Jimmy insisted. This isn't a payment, Martin. It's a token of respect from one friend to another. Martin finally accepted the envelope, but his gaze revealed a certain worry. Jimmy, I don't know what you're investigating, but be careful. There's an old saying at the port, not all sharks swim in the sea. Some wear suits and ties. Jimmy nodded. I'll be careful. Thanks for the concern. Back at home, Jimmy re-examined the company's financial records from the past 6 months in his study. With the new clues, he began to compare the payments to Mountain Wind Logistics and other suspicious suppliers with the company's major decisions in project progress, trying to find a pattern. He discovered that whenever the company was preparing to bid for a new project or discuss financing with the bank, the invoices from these suspicious suppliers would increase. More worryingly, he noticed some unexplained fund movements in the company's accounts. Small but frequent transfers, always just before the end of the month or quarter, for amounts just below the threshold that required a dual signature. All this pointed to a disturbing possibility. Julian might be embezzling company funds. But Jimmy needed more concrete proof. He needed to know where the money was ultimately going and what Julian's true intentions were. He picked up the phone and called a private investigator. It was someone he had met during a construction dispute, named Santana. Ex-cop, discreet, charged a high price but was efficient. I need you to investigate the destination of a company's funds. I don't need too many details. I just want to know where the money ends up. Also, I want to know about the activities at an address, especially who frequently enters and leaves, Jimmy said calmly. Cost is not an issue, but I need absolute discretion. Understood, mister. Jimmy, Santana replied, his voice deep and professional. I'll need some basic information to start the investigation. Jimmy provided the invoices from Mountain Wind Logistics and the bank transfer records, as well as several addresses where he suspected Julian might frequent. Finally, he hesitated for a moment but decided to make one last request. In addition, if during your investigation you discover anything interesting, please let me know as well. Santana was silent for a few seconds on the other end of the line. Mr. Jimmy, I need to clarify. Are you requesting a comprehensive information gathering, including personal-level information? Jimmy closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew he was crossing a line, but deep down, he already sensed a certain possibility. He just didn't want to face it directly. Yes, comprehensive. I want to know everything you find, he finally said. A week later, Jimmy received a brown paper envelope. Santana delivered it personally to his temporary office at the construction site, not the company headquarters. All the findings are in there, Santana said, a rare tone of compassion in his voice. I suggest you read it in private. Some of the contents might require some mental preparation. Jimmy nodded, thanked the detective, and locked his office door. He made sure no one was around before carefully opening the envelope. Inside was a detailed fund flow diagram showing how the money from Mountain Wind Logistics passed through a series of shell companies and offshore accounts, finally ending up in an offshore account registered in the name of Julian's distant relative. More surprisingly, part of these funds returned through another route, purchasing a luxury apartment in Brickell and a beach villa in Key Largo. Both properties were legally held by a company called Pacific Vista, whose real controller was Julian. But what struck Jimmy the most were several photographs in the envelope. Taken on a beach in Key Largo, they showed Victoria and Julian talking intimately on the balcony of a private villa. Although the photos were long distance, the level of intimacy in their physical contact went far beyond a simple friendship. In one of the photos, Julian's hand rested on Victoria's waist while she leaned her head on his shoulder. There was another set of photos taken near a boutique hotel close to the new gallery Victoria had mentioned. The date stamp indicated last Friday, the day of their wedding anniversary. Victoria and Julian were entering the hotel together, then leaving 3 hours later, looking intimately close. Jimmy's hands began to tremble, and a drop of cold sweat slid down his forehead. He continued to go through the documents and found even more shocking evidence, a life insurance policy purchased with A&J funds, where the beneficiary was Julian, not the company or Victoria. The insurance amount was $2 million, nearly 10 times Jimmy's annual income. The last document was a printout of an email sent by Julian to an unknown address. The content was brief but significant. The plan is proceeding smoothly. E has no suspicions. The paperwork is ready. We estimate in 3 months we can complete the cleanup, and then we will be free. Remember to destroy this email. Jimmy didn't go home immediately. His world had collapsed in that moment, but he didn't show it. He just mechanically put all the documents back into the brown envelope, sealed it carefully, and locked it in his office safe. He drove to the construction site of the Horizon Tower. It was late at night, and all the workers had left. He rode the construction elevator alone to the top floor, where there was only a reinforced concrete skeleton. The night view of Miami spread out at his feet, the city lights glittering like stars. The cold wind blew through the steel bars, making a low whistling sound, as if mourning his lost marriage and trust. Jimmy stood on a suspended steel beam, feeling the solidity and the emptiness beneath his feet. This building, like his life, seemed solid on the surface, but in reality, it might have been secretly sabotaged. The initial shock washed over his entire body. His hands trembled, his breathing quickened, and his stomach twisted as if someone had punched him hard. 20 years of marriage, 15 years of partnership, all the trust and dedication seemed so ridiculous at this moment. He always thought he was building a solid structure, but the reality was that the foundation had long been eaten away. Then came a deep sense of humiliation. He remembered those social occasions where Julian and Victoria were together, while he always stood alone in a corner, seen as the boring engineer. Had they been laughing at his dullness in private? Did every glance they exchanged contain deceit and contempt for him? Rage bubbled up like lava inside him. He imagined storming into that villa and ending it all with his own hands. He even thought about using a hammer from the site to smash Julian's handsome face. He wanted to hear Victoria's screams and pleas, to make her understand the consequences of her mistake. But his rationality told him this would only make him lose more, while the others would become victims. In this society, a violent act from an enraged husband would not get sympathy, even if he was the wronged party. Besides, killing, however satisfying, would only destroy his own life. Despair consumed him like a dark tide. His marriage, career, and life plans, everything seemed like a building constructed on sand. A single storm could destroy it all. Standing on the steel beam, looking down at the ground dozens of floors below, for a moment, the thought of ending it all crossed his mind. One step forward and all the pain, shame, and betrayal would vanish with the wind. But in the midst of this bottomless despair, Jimmy's mind began to shift. Years of engineering training allowed him to maintain his ability to analyze and solve problems, even in the most difficult situations. He began to analyze his situation calmly, as if analyzing a complex engineering problem. If a building's foundation is already rotten, he muttered to himself, his voice scattered by the wind, repairing it is pointless. The only option is a controlled demolition. Precisely calculate each step, ensure the collapse doesn't cause greater damage, and then rebuild on the ruins. He remembered a project in California where an old building needed to be demolished, but was surrounded by historic buildings, so they couldn't use conventional demolition methods. They finally adopted a technique called precision cutting, first weakening the building's key support points, then removing the supports in a specific order, allowing the building to collapse inward without damaging the surrounding structures. This memory gave him an idea. He didn't need to solve the problem through direct confrontation. That would only give Julian and Victoria a chance to deflect. Instead, he could, like in a precision demolition, identify the key support points of their plan and remove them one by one, letting the entire sham collapse under its own weight. They wanted his company and his fortune? Fine, he would let them see how it all slipped through their fingers. They mocked his slowness and weakness. Perfect. He would use that appearance as a weapon. They thought they had everything under control. He would show them that real power doesn't lie in social charm and pretty words, but in a cool head and precise calculations. At dawn, when the first ray of sunlight pierced Miami's gray sky, Jimmy had already made his decision. He wouldn't question hysterically, he wouldn't accuse angrily, and he certainly wouldn't weakly seek reconciliation. He would use the precision of an engineer and the patience of an architect to dismantle this already rotten building step by step while laying the foundation for a new one. He took out his phone and looked up a number. It was too early to call, but he already knew what his first step would be. He needed an ally, someone equally betrayed, with equal reason to be furious. He needed Catherine. He swore to himself that when it was all over, he would make Julian and Victoria know that they had not only lost money and status, but also the last shred of his respect. They would know they hadn't lost to an angry husband or a jealous partner, but to a man they had never truly known. Miami's Wynwood district is the city's artistic heart, with narrow, colorful streets flanked by old warehouses, now converted into galleries, cafes, and boutiques. The atmosphere here is completely different from the modern sheen of Brickell or the luxurious estates of Coral Gables. It's a space that preserves a vibrant, creative energy. Catherine's gallery, Window in Time, is located on a quiet street, specializing in showcasing works by contemporary American artists. The gallery's exterior is simple, blending in with the surrounding street art, but the interior is exquisitely designed, with clever lighting that highlights each piece of art perfectly. Jimmy never thought he would come here on his own initiative. Although Catherine was his partner's wife, their interactions had always been limited to polite conversations at social events. In his mind, Catherine was a quiet woman with an exceptional passion for art, but seemingly little interest in Julian's business activities. He walked into the gallery, where a solo exhibition by a young artist on the deconstruction and reconstruction of Miami's urban landscape was being held. On the walls hung paintings that broke down the city's landmark buildings into geometric shapes, then reassembled them in a distorted way, unsettling but thought-provoking. Jimmy found himself drawn to a painting that deconstructed the Freedom Tower. The building had been dismantled into its basic structural elements, then reconnected in a way that defied the laws of physics, creating an almost surreal architectural form. This painting is called Reconstruction of Faith, Catherine's voice came from behind him. The artist wants to express that even the most solid structures can be reimagined and rebuilt. Jimmy turned and saw Catherine standing there, wearing a simple navy dress, an antique silver coin necklace around her neck. Unlike Victoria's luxurious attire, Catherine's clothing showed an understated elegance. "This is an unexpected visit," she said, her voice quiet but with a hint of caution. "Julian told me you weren't interested in art." Jimmy looked around, his gaze once again stopping on the deconstructed tower painting. Architecture and art have a lot in common. They're both about structure, balance, and expression. A building without art is just a pile of materials. A piece of art without structure is just messy colors and lines, he replied, a rare note of sensitivity in his voice. "But I didn't come here today to appreciate art." Catherine nodded slightly, as if she had already anticipated this. Her gaze was sharp, like she was evaluating a potential forgery. "Let's go to my office to talk. This isn't the place for deep conversations." She led Jimmy through the exhibition hall to a small but tidy office in the back. Outside was an inner courtyard with an old oak tree, its leafy branches casting dappled shadows. She closed the door and motioned for Jimmy to sit while she took a seat behind the desk. "So, what brings an engineer to an art gallery?" she asked, her tone calm but alert. Jimmy didn't answer immediately. He took a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "This is a risk assessment report on potential joint liability for the company." Catherine raised an eyebrow, not reaching for the folder. "I don't understand what this has to do with me. I just own a gallery, with no connection to A&J's business." "Because as Julian's wife, if the company faces legal trouble due to certain irregular operations, your personal assets, including this gallery, could be affected," Jimmy said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing an ordinary construction detail. Catherine's gaze turned piercing. "Explain." Jimmy opened the folder and took out several printed sheets. "In the past 4 months, the company has paid large amounts in consulting fees and coordination fees to a shell company called Mountain Wind Logistics. These expenses have no corresponding service contracts or actual work results. This kind of operation, under tax and corporate law, could easily be considered embezzlement or even money laundering." He paused, then continued. "These funds, through a series of complex transfers, end up in several offshore accounts, including one used to purchase properties. If the IRS or financial regulators start investigating, everyone involved could be implicated, including you as the legal spouse." Catherine's expression didn't change, but her fingers tapped lightly on the desk, a habit of hers when thinking. "Why are you telling me this? You could report it directly to the authorities or bring it up at the board meeting." "Because I think you should know the risks you're facing," Jimmy replied calmly. I'm not here to expose or threaten. I just think that as two people who stand to lose a lot, we should be honest with each other." Catherine stared at Jimmy for a long moment, as if evaluating the authenticity of a work of art. Her gaze reflected a series of complex emotions: caution, doubt, thought, and finally a serene understanding. "You know more than just about the company's affairs, don't you?" She finally spoke, her voice low and cold. "You know about Julian and Victoria." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Jimmy didn't deny it, just nodded slightly. Catherine gave a bitter smile and stood up, walking to a small bar in the corner of the office. "Want a drink? I think we both need something to continue this conversation." "Bourbon, if you have it," Jimmy replied. Catherine took out a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses, poured 2 shots, handed one to Jimmy, and sat back down. "I already knew about them," she took a sip of her drink and said calmly. "Julian has never been good at hiding his secrets, at least not from those who are really watching. I assume you just found out recently?" Jimmy nodded. "A week ago." "What do you plan to do? The traditional confrontation, divorce, or revenge?" Jimmy shook his head. "No, none of that would solve the problem. What I want to do is rebuild." He pointed toward the painting of the deconstructed tower. "Like that painting, dismantle an already damaged structure and then rebuild it more solidly." Catherine's eyes showed a flash of interest. "Ash, specifically?" "First, protect our respective interests. Then, let those who tried to hurt us bear the consequences." Jimmy looked directly into Catherine's eyes. "But I need to understand your position. Are you prepared?" Catherine thought for a moment, then said, "I need time to think. This isn't a decision that can be made rashly." Jimmy nodded, standing up. "Of course, this is my private number." He handed her a card. "Whatever your decision is, I will respect it." He walked to the door, but before leaving, he turned and added, "By the way, these paintings have a lot of depth, especially the one of the deconstructed tower. The artist sees the structure beneath the surface. That's rare. Few people can see through the surface to find the skeleton that holds everything up." Catherine smiled slightly, the first genuine show of emotion in the entire conversation. "Yes, they certainly are few." 3 days later, Jimmy received a call from an unknown number. "The Daily Grind Cafe, 3 p.m., Catherine said briefly and hung up. The Daily Grind Cafe is located in a quiet corner of Coconut Grove, known for its old bookshelves and quality coffee. It's not near the fancy places in Coral Gables that Julian frequents, nor is it close to Catherine's gallery in Wynwood, a place where one is unlikely to run into acquaintances. When Jimmy arrived, Catherine was already sitting at a corner table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. Today she wore a well-tailored gray suit, her hair pulled back, looking more serious and professional than usual. Jimmy ordered a black coffee and sat down opposite her. For a moment they were both silent, just sipping their coffees. Finally, Catherine took a USB drive from her purse and placed it on the table. "This is a copy of all the documents from Julian's safe," she said calmly. "There's one file in particular, which Julian considers his lucky charm, but I think will be his epitaph." Jimmy looked at the small USB drive, not immediately taking it. "When did you start preparing?" The corner of Catherine's lips curved into a bitter smile. "To leave Julian? About 2 years ago when I found out about his first affair. It wasn't Victoria, but a model. That relationship lasted 3 months. Then came the next one. And the next. Victoria is just the most recent, but it seems more serious because what she can offer him isn't just physical satisfaction, but also your company." She took a sip of her coffee and continued. "As for preparing this evidence, about 6 months ago, when I noticed unusual activity in the family accounts, I started to suspect that Julian was not only being unfaithful emotionally, but might also be doing something financially unethical. So I started paying attention, collecting information." Jimmy nodded thoughtfully. "Why help me?" Catherine's gaze became sharp. "No, Jimmy, I'm not helping you. I'm helping myself." She gently pushed the USB drive toward him. "My marriage to Julian has long been in name only. I stayed only because the time wasn't right. I needed to make sure that when I left I could protect my assets and my dignity. If his and Victoria's plan succeeds, I'll be left with nothing." Jimmy finally took the USB drive. "So this is a mutually beneficial collaboration?" More accurately, a survival alliance, Catherine corrected. We've both been betrayed by the same people. We both face the risk of losing everything. Joining forces is the only reasonable option. Jimmy nodded. I need to know, how far are you willing to go? Catherine's gaze became firm. As long as I can protect my gallery and my personal assets, I'll go all the way. Julian has taken enough from me, my trust, my time, my emotional security. I will not let him take my financial independence, Jimmy nodded. Then we should discuss the plan ahead. The key document on the USB drive was, as Catherine had said, a lethal asset holding agreement. According to this agreement, Julian effectively controlled several key properties in the company's name, while Catherine acted as the nominal holder. This kind of arrangement is not uncommon, where the wealthy often use this method to evade taxes or protect assets from marital disputes. But this agreement had a key point. It gave Catherine the legal right to dispose of these assets, although in the spirit of the agreement, these assets still belong to Julian. More shockingly, the USB drive also contained a memorandum of understanding signed jointly by Julian and Victoria, detailing how they planned to take control of A&J and how they would distribute the assets after removing the obstacles. The memo didn't explicitly mention Jimmy and Catherine, but the meaning of the term obstacles was unmistakable. Is this memo legally valid? Jimmy asked, pointing to the document on the screen. Catherine shook her head. It's not a formal legal document, more like a plan, but it proves their intent, which is morally indefensible. As for the asset holding agreement, that is completely legal. Julian personally hired the best lawyers to draft it. Jimmy gave an ironic smile. It's ironic that the legal tool he so meticulously designed could now become his trap. Exactly, Catherine nodded. He was too confident, believing I would never betray him, even after his multiple betrayals. That arrogance will be his fatal weakness. In the following days, Jimmy and Catherine began their conspiracy. They agreed to meet during the gallery's closing hours, or in cafes far from the usual haunts of both couples, ensuring they wouldn't be discovered by acquaintances of Julian or Victoria. Jimmy continued to work normally at the company, and Catherine maintained the daily operations of the gallery. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Meanwhile, two different narrative lines began to unfold in parallel. On the visible side, Julian and Victoria were immersed in the pre-celebration of their victory. They became bolder, almost undisguised in their relationship. One evening, at the restaurant Nautilus in Brickell, Julian hosted a small gathering of business partners, inviting several bankers and potential investors. Victoria attended as his special assistant, staying by his side all night, the chemistry between them so obvious it made some guests uncomfortable. When a banker discreetly asked about Jimmy's whereabouts, Julian replied lightly, "He's busy with site matters, can't get away. You know, he's always been more of a technical advisor to the company than a real decision-maker." After dinner, Julian and Victoria left together for the newly acquired apartment. In the elevator, Victoria leaned against Julian, laughing. "Did you see their faces? They already see you as the sole captain of the ship." Julian smiled smugly, kissing her hair. "Because I am. Soon Jimmy will realize his era is over." "And Catherine?" Victoria asked, a hint of concern in her voice. "Won't she be a problem?" Julian dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand. "Catherine? She only cares about her paintings and sculptures. As long as I don't touch her gallery, she won't care about anything else. Besides, all the important assets are under my control. Her name is just a legal formality." At the same time, Julian began his big move at the corporate level. He proposed using several key company properties to apply for a large loan from the bank to invest in a major project that could completely change the company's scale. "This is our turning point," he exclaimed excitedly at the board meeting, showing an elegant presentation with renderings of a stunning mixed-use project. "Once this project succeeds, A&J will go from a regional construction company to a national real estate developer. We will no longer be mere builders taking projects, but developers creating projects." Jimmy unusually supported Julian's proposal at the meeting, which surprised the other directors present. "I agree with Julian," Jimmy said calmly. "This is indeed a rare opportunity. The company has accumulated enough technical capability and market reputation. It's time to move to a higher level. Julian looked at Jimmy with some surprise, but quickly accepted this unexpected support. From his perspective, Jimmy had probably finally recognized his marginal position in the company's future, wisely choosing to submit. The board unanimously approved the proposal, and Julian began to prepare the loan application and project planning. He told Victoria, "Get ready to witness history, darling. This will be the rebirth of A&J Construction and our rebirth as well." Meanwhile, in the shadows, Jimmy, Catherine, and their lawyer Patrick, in the back room of the gallery, were meticulously planning every step. Patrick was a lawyer who was only interested in money and the articles of the law, with no interest in moral judgments, concerned only with legal boundaries and efficiency. He was recommended by a friend of Catherine's and had previously helped several clients caught in complex marital and commercial disputes. "Based on this holding agreement," Patrick said, pointing to the document on the computer screen, "Mrs. Catherine effectively has legal control over these properties. Although the agreement says she holds them on behalf of Julian, legally, she can dispose of these assets on her own." Jimmy nodded. "Will the bank find this out?" Patrick shook his head. "Not immediately. The bank's due diligence mainly focuses on the company's overall financial situation and the market value of the properties. They will check the property deeds, but those show A&J's name, not individuals. They won't dig down to the level of the holding agreement unless someone specifically brings it to their attention." Catherine frowned. "This sounds like fraud," Patrick shrugged. "It's taking advantage of legal loopholes. Julian himself used this holding agreement to bypass legal restrictions. We are just using the same tools to complete a redistribution of property." Jimmy thought for a moment. "So, what are the specific operational steps?" Patrick opened a flowchart. "First, we need to establish a new company, with Mrs. Catherine and Mr. Jimmy each holding 50% of the shares. Then, Mrs. Catherine, as the nominal holder, will transfer control of the properties to this new company. This will require completing a series of legal documents, including debt substitution, share pledge, etc. All these operations must be completed before Mr. Julian submits the loan application to the bank." "Are these operations all legal?" Catherine asked again. Patrick nodded. "Completely legal. We are just taking advantage of the legal structure Julian himself established. Ironically, the complex structure he created to bypass the law now becomes our tool." Jimmy pondered for a moment, then asked, "Is there anything else we need to be aware of?" "Yes," Patrick said seriously. "Once we initiate the action, we must complete it quickly. If Mr. Julian discovers our plan, he might take countermeasures. Also, we need to ensure that all documents and signatures are genuine and valid, leaving him no legal loopholes." Thus, while Julian was busy negotiating loan details with the bank, Jimmy and Catherine had already begun their action. They established a new company called New Cornerstone Holdings, with Catherine and Jimmy each holding 50% of the shares. Then, through a series of complex legal operations, including debt substitution and share pledge, they quietly transferred effective control of the properties to the new company, leaving only a legal shell for Julian. At the same time, Jimmy used his authority as a co-founder of the company to modify the operating privileges of several key bank accounts, requiring the joint signatures of both founders for large amount transfers. This change was presented as a routine measure to strengthen financial control, and not even the finance department noticed its deeper implications. Jimmy also communicated privately with several major clients, suggesting that there might be impending changes in the company's control, advising them to wait and see. These clients, with years of cooperative relationship with Jimmy, trusted his professional judgment and agreed not to take action until receiving official documents. All this happened quietly, without attracting anyone's attention. Julian was completely focused on his grand project, and Victoria was busy planning her future luxurious life. They were like two sleepwalkers immersed in their own fantasies, unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already been hollowed out. 2 weeks later, the bank approved Julian's loan application. It was a huge victory, with a loan amount exceeding his expectations, reaching $5 million. Julian was ecstatic, and immediately booked a table at Miami's most luxurious restaurant, the Chef's Table, inviting the company's executives and partners to a celebration dinner. "Make sure you bring Catherine," he told Jimmy, a slightly malicious tone in his voice. "I have an important announcement to make in front of everyone." Jimmy nodded. "Of course, I look forward to it." That night, in the private room of the Chef's Table, the guests were toasting. Julian sat at the head of the table, constantly raising his glass to celebrate, recounting how he had convinced the bank to provide such a large loan. Victoria sat beside him, radiant, occasionally glancing at Jimmy with the eyes of a victor. Jimmy, meanwhile, was unusually calm, even proactively toasting Julian, congratulating him on his extraordinary achievement. "To the future of A&J," Julian raised his glass, "and to the new leadership team." Everyone responded to the toast, only Catherine with a slightly hesitant gesture. Her gaze briefly met Jimmy's, both exchanging an almost imperceptible signal. It was a silent communication that only those who have experienced similar betrayals could understand, a complicity based on shared experiences of treachery. Towards the end of the evening, Julian stood up and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an important announcement." He looked around, deliberately pausing for effect. "With the launch of the new project, the company will undergo a management reorganization. I will take full control of the company's operations, while Jimmy will focus on technical consulting work." A silence fell over the private room. This was effectively an announcement that Jimmy was being marginalized from the core decision-making. Several old employees looked uncomfortably at Jimmy, not knowing how to react. Julian looked smugly at Jimmy, expecting a reaction of anger or humiliation. But Jimmy just nodded calmly, even smiling and saying, "Sounds like a reasonable arrangement. After all, I've always been better at the technical side than management." This calmness puzzled Julian, but he quickly attributed it to a loser's numbness. The dinner ended in apparent harmony, but the undercurrents were already beginning to stir. That night, in the car on the way home, Catherine asked Jimmy, "You really don't mind being demoted?" Jimmy shook his head, a mysterious smile appearing at the corner of his lips. "Position is just a superficial thing, like the outer walls of a building. What's really important is who controls the core infrastructure." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Tomorrow the game officially begins, right?" Jimmy looked out the car window, the night scenery of Miami blurred in the rain. "Yes, tomorrow. The first domino will fall." The morning after the dinner, Julian was in his office discussing the preliminary plan for the new project with the design team. He was in an excellent mood, occasionally describing to the team the magnificent vision of the completed project, a complex integrating luxury apartments, a boutique shopping center, and a 5-star hotel, which would become a new landmark in Miami. "This will completely change A&J's positioning," he said passionately. "We will no longer be an ordinary construction company, but the founders of a real estate empire." At that moment, his private phone rang. Seeing it was the bank's number, he answered expectantly, thinking it would be good news about the loan disbursement. "Mr. Julian, this is Martinez from the International Bank." The voice on the other end of the line sounded somewhat tense. "Our compliance department discovered during the final review that there is a property dispute over the land you applied to mortgage. The loan has been temporarily frozen until this issue is resolved." Julian felt a wave of dizziness. What dispute? This is impossible. The land is all in the company's name. "According to our investigation," Martinez said cautiously, "although this land is registered in the company's name, the effective control seems to have been transferred to a company called New Cornerstone Holdings. We need more documentation to clarify this." Julian hung up the phone, unable to comprehend for a moment what was happening. New Cornerstone Holdings? He had never heard of this company. It must be a mistake by the bank or some kind of administrative mix-up. He immediately called the company's legal and financial departments, demanding an urgent investigation of this situation. Hours later, the company's legal counsel brought shocking news. Through a series of complex legal operations, the effective control of the land had indeed been transferred to the company New Cornerstone Holdings. More shockingly, these operations were based on that asset holding agreement, and the shareholders of New Cornerstone Holdings were Catherine and Jimmy. "This is impossible!" Julian roared, violently sweeping the folder of documents off the table. "Catherine can't betray me. She doesn't even understand these legal operations. It must be Jimmy. This bastard has been plotting behind my back." The chief financial officer added nervously, "There's another problem, Mr. Julian. We just discovered that the operating privileges of several of the company's main bank accounts have been modified, now requiring the joint signatures of both founders for large amount transfers." Julian felt another wave of dizziness. His perfect plan was crumbling at an incredible speed. When was it modified? Who approved it? "A month ago," the CFO checked the documents. "The approval documents have your signature." "I never signed such documents," Julian shouted, then abruptly stopped. He remembered that a month ago, Jimmy had indeed given him a stack of documents to sign, saying they were routine financial control updates. At the time, he was busy meeting with a potential investor, so he only briefly reviewed them before signing. He immediately tried to contact Jimmy, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The receptionist told him that Jimmy had left early to inspect the site at the port where phone signal was poor. Julian tried to contact Catherine, but her phone was also unresponsive. The gallery assistant just politely said that Catherine had an important art evaluation meeting today and did not wish to be disturbed. As time went on, the situation worsened. That afternoon, the company's finance department received a notification from the bank that all accounts had been temporarily blocked because someone had reported potential abnormal fund movements. Julian tried to use his personal connections to resolve this issue, but the bank insisted on waiting for the investigation results. The next morning, the situation escalated further. Several of the company's major clients called almost simultaneously, expressing the need to review the contracts because they had received anonymous emails about potential changes in the company's effective control. Among these clients, several were major clients that Jimmy had personally served for years, and they had deep trust in him. At the same time, an anonymous tip about potential money laundering activities by the company Mountain Wind Logistics was sent to the IRS and the Financial Regulatory Agency. The tip detailed the fund flows and the people involved, with convincing evidence that could not be ignored. Julian felt his world spinning. In just 36 hours, he had gone from a successful man about to reach the pinnacle of his career to a cornered beast in multiple crises. The bank loan frozen, company accounts blocked, client relationships shaking, and even possibly facing a criminal investigation. He began to realize that all this was not a coincidence, but a carefully planned conspiracy. And the orchestrator of this conspiracy could be none other than Jimmy. But he couldn't believe Catherine was involved. In his perception, Catherine had always been a docile wife, uninterested in business matters, incapable of having the courage or ability to participate in such an action. Julian called Victoria, his voice filled with panic and accusations. "Everything is falling apart. The bank has frozen the loan. Clients are demanding to renegotiate. The company accounts are blocked. Someone even reported me to the authorities. It must be Jimmy behind all this." Victoria couldn't immediately grasp the severity of the situation. "Darling, calm down. Jimmy can't do something like this. He's too simple. It must be some misunderstanding or technical problem." "No, it's not a misunderstanding," Julian was practically shouting. "It's a carefully planned conspiracy. I need you to go find him right now. Find out what's going on. You must use your marriage relationship to make him stop. Otherwise, we're finished." Victoria tried to calm Julian, but he was already paranoid. Finally, she agreed to go find Jimmy immediately. "Okay, I'll go ask him," she said. "But I still think you're overreacting. Jimmy isn't that kind of person. He might be hurt, he might be angry, but he wouldn't be so calculating." Victoria drove back to the apartment in Brickell. She expected Jimmy not to be home, but to her surprise, he was sitting at his desk, cleaning his father's pen with that piece of chamois, just as she had seen him do countless times. This familiar scene suddenly made Victoria feel uneasy. Jimmy seemed too calm, like the surface of the sea before a storm. She had never seen him in this state, not the usual quiet calm, nor the painful anger she expected, but a kind of almost transcendental serenity. "Jimmy," she said, standing at the door, her tone uneasy, "I need to talk to you." He looked up at her, then continued cleaning the pen. "Of course. I was waiting for you." Victoria took a deep breath, deciding to get straight to the point. Julian says the company is in trouble, that the bank has frozen the loan, that clients are demanding to renegotiate. He thinks you're causing trouble. Jimmy calmly continued cleaning the pen. Julian is always like that. When a problem arises, the first thing he does is blame others. It's his habit, isn't it? Victoria felt a surge of irritation. Jimmy's calmness had always unsettled her, just like now. This isn't a small matter, Jimmy. It's about the future of the company, and also our future. Jimmy finally put down the pen and looked directly into her eyes. Our future? Victoria, do we really have a future together? Victoria was stunned. She didn't expect Jimmy to be so direct. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. For the past few months, she had been so immersed in her relationship with Julian that she had hardly considered Jimmy's feelings. She was used to his silence and submission, assuming he would never rebel. I don't know what you're talking about, she tried to dissemble, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Jimmy smiled, a smile Victoria had never seen before, serene but with a hint of irony. You understand. You and Julian, the beach villa in Key Largo, and those plans. Victoria's face turned pale instantly. She didn't expect Jimmy to already know everything. She thought her disguise was perfect, that Jimmy would always be engrossed in his construction plans and cement. But now, his gaze told her that he knew everything. A strange sense of relief made her abandon the pretense, maybe because the accumulation of lies had finally reached an unbearable point, or maybe because deep down she wanted to be discovered, wanted to end this double life. Well, since you know, she drew herself up, her tone becoming defiant. I've been sleeping with your partner for months, and telling you now feels so liberating. She expected to see shock, anger, or pain on Jimmy's face, but he just watched her quietly. I know. Go on, tell me more. His voice was like a current under a calm surface, seemingly gentle but with an unnameable force. Victoria was frozen. Her carefully prepared script, the countless rehearsed expressions, the imagined scenarios, all crumbled before these 7 simple words. Why? Why aren't you angry? She asked, almost unconsciously, the taunt in her voice replaced by unease. Jimmy finally put down the pen and looked directly into her eyes. Because your lover doesn't know yet that his company is now mine. Jimmy's voice was still calm, but each word seemed precisely calculated, landing on the most vulnerable support point. And his beautiful wife is too. Victoria's face began to pale. She couldn't comprehend the meaning of this sentence, but the certainty and calmness in Jimmy's eyes brought a wave of fear. What nonsense are you talking about? She tried to keep her voice steady, but evidently failed. Jimmy got up and walked to the window, his back to her. You know, Victoria, there was always something I didn't understand. Why did you choose me as a husband instead of someone more suited to your tastes, like Julian? He turned around and continued. Now I understand. You needed someone who could provide a stable life, someone who wouldn't question you, who wouldn't limit you. And I, quiet, work-focused, easy to please, was the ideal candidate. Victoria wanted to protest, but found herself speechless, because Jimmy had stated a truth she had never dared to face. But you and Julian made a fatal mistake, Jimmy continued. You mistook my silence for weakness, my focus for dullness. You thought I was just a technician who drew plans and supervised sites, forgetting how I clawed my way up from a poor neighborhood, step by step. The doorbell rang, interrupting his words. Jimmy went to open the door, and a middle-aged man with an impassive expression stood at the entrance, holding a folder. Lawyer Patrick, come in. Jimmy stepped aside to let him in. Patrick entered, nodded to Victoria, and placed the folder on the coffee table. All the documents are ready, as you requested. Jimmy picked up the folder and handed it to Victoria. There are 2 documents in here. The first is a divorce settlement. The second is a court notice requiring you to vacate this apartment within 24 hours. The ownership of the apartment has already been transferred to the company, New Cornerstone Holdings. Victoria tremblingly took the folder but didn't open it. You can't do this. This is our joint property. Jimmy shook his head. No, Victoria. This apartment has always been registered in A&J's name as an executive residence, and now the control of A&J has changed. Victoria's gaze shifted from the folder to Jimmy's face, suddenly realizing something. Catherine. It was Catherine who helped you, wasn't it? Jimmy didn't answer directly. He returned to the desk, picked up the pen, and continued to wipe it gently with the chamois. You always thought Catherine only cared about her paintings and sculptures, that she wouldn't pay attention to business and legal matters. But in reality, she is much smarter than you imagined. She discovered Julian's plan months ago and has been waiting for the right moment to strike back. Outside, an urgent car horn blared. Victoria went to the window and saw Julian's car parked below, but the security guard was preventing him from entering the building. The security in this luxury apartment complex was tight. Unannounced visitors were not allowed in, not even acquaintances of the owners. Victoria's phone rang. It was Julian. She answered, and his hysterical voice came through the earpiece. "What's going on? Why can't I get in? The guard says I'm on a no-entry list." Victoria looked at Jimmy's back, and suddenly she understood everything. Her beauty and social skills, which she was so proud of, were so powerless in the face of real power. She and Julian thought they were manipulating Jimmy, when in reality, they had only been allowed to immerse themselves in their own fantasies until the moment of judgment arrived. "Julian," she said in a low voice, a hint of fear in it. "He knows everything. Not just about us, but also about the company, those accounts, those plans. He knows it all." On the other end of the phone, Julian was silent for a few seconds, then erupted into a series of curses and threats. "He can't do this. We'll fight back. I have friends. I have connections. He'll regret this." Victoria listened to Julian's roars, but found that she no longer believed him. For the past few months, she had been attracted to Julian's confidence and charisma, believing he was a true strongman. But now, facing a real crisis, other than panic and threats, he seemed unable to do anything else. She slowly lowered the phone and turned to Jimmy. "Why?" she asked, her voice filled with despair. "Why wait so long? Why not expose everything earlier?" Jimmy finally put down the pen and turned to her. "Because a good engineer knows that demolishing a building isn't just about taking a sledgehammer to it. You need to study its structure, find the key support points, and then, in the right sequence, dismantle it step by step. Too fast would cause unnecessary chaos. Too slow would give the opponent time to react." He walked closer to Victoria, but maintained a certain distance. "I gave you both enough time to weave your own rope, and then use it to hang yourselves." Victoria's eyes welled with tears. Not out of love or regret, but because she suddenly realized she had always underestimated this man. She thought he was a character she could manipulate at will, but the reality was that he was the real chess player. "And now what?" she asked, her voice weak. "Now you have 24 hours to pack your bags and leave," Jimmy said calmly. "If you sign the divorce settlement, I will give you a sum sufficient for you to start over. If you don't sign, we'll settle it through the courts, but given the evidence I have, you may not get anything." Outside, Julian's car finally drove away in despair. In the apartment, only Victoria's sobs and the cold, rhythmic sound of Jimmy cleaning the pen remained. 2 months later, the Window in Time gallery in Wynwood had been completely renovated. The new exhibition theme was Reconstruction, Rebirth on the Ruins, showcasing a series of works that recombined broken buildings. The gallery had doubled in size, adding a coffee shop and a small screening room for art lectures and film screenings. On the gallery's terrace, Jimmy and Catherine were examining the blueprints for a new project. It was a complex that merged modern architecture and public art spaces to be built on A&J's original land. The design was bold and innovative, incorporating both Jimmy's consistent pursuit of structural stability and Catherine's unique understanding of art and aesthetics. "This support structure is very creative," Catherine said, pointing to a part of the blueprint. "But will it withstand Miami's hurricanes?" Jimmy nodded. "This design has successful cases in Japan. The key is in the foundation." He pointed to a part of the blueprint. "The foundation here needs to be deeper than ever before. Only by being rooted in a solid foundation can a building stand stable during a storm." Catherine looked at him, showing for the first time a genuine, unreserved smile. Over the past 2 months, they had gone through a storm together. Julian tried to fight back through legal means, but his efforts were in vain. The company funds he had embezzled became evidence against him, and the investigation by the IRS and financial regulators had already begun. Julian was facing serious legal consequences. Victoria chose to sign the divorce settlement, accepting a considerable but not overly generous sum offered by Jimmy. She moved back in with her parents, and it was rumored she was considering moving abroad to start over. The two of them never contacted each other again. Those promises and vows, like the Miami mist, had long since dissipated without a trace. The company A&J was reborn after the restructuring. Jimmy and Catherine established a new holding company, merging A&J's assets with New Cornerstone Holdings. Jimmy was in charge of technology and operations, while Catherine handled design and client relations. Their professional complementarity created a unique business model, perfectly blending architecture and art. "Did you ever think about how all this would turn out?" Catherine asked suddenly, taking a sip of her coffee. Jimmy thought for a moment. "I never believed in perfect endings, Catherine. Life isn't a fairy tale, and we aren't innocent victims either. I don't regret our counterattack. In certain situations, maintaining one's own dignity and values is more important than maintaining a superficial peace." He paused, his gaze becoming sharp. "I sometimes still think about them, not out of longing or forgiveness, but to remind myself that I must never forget the taste of betrayal. That pain has been engraved in my bones, becoming a part of me. I won't forget, nor do I intend to forgive." Catherine nodded, perfectly understanding this feeling. "Me too. Julian took away my trust, something irreparable, but at least now we control our own destiny." She raised her coffee cup. "To deep foundations." Jimmy also raised his cup, gently touching hers. "To new beginnings." Between them was not a relationship of lovers, but of two partners rebuilding on the ruins. Their alliance was based on shared values and mutual respect, a bond far more solid than those relationships built on illusory appearances. "Have you heard any news?" Catherine asked suddenly. Jimmy knew who she was referring to. "Julian went to Brazil. It seems he found new opportunities there. But the legal troubles he faces won't disappear because of his departure. The IRS has already frozen all his assets in the States. Victoria went back to her parents' house. I heard she recently started working at an interior design firm." Catherine nodded, not asking further. The past was past. What was important was the present reconstruction. She didn't hate Victoria or Julian, at least not anymore. She just hoped they would never appear in her life again. In the distance, the Miami sky was still that characteristic gray. But under this gray sky, a new, more solid structure was quietly laying its foundation. Sometimes, destruction is not the end, but a necessary step towards rebirth. Just like the city of Miami, which through countless storms and reconstructions has become stronger and stronger. Jimmy looked towards the distant sky, remembering the words his father used to say. "Son, the gray sky isn't a symbol of decay, but proof of resilience. It reminds us how many layers of history and wisdom are hidden under a seemingly monotonous surface." He finally understood the meaning of these words. Just as under this city's gray sky lies a rich history and culture, the gray moments in life can also contain opportunities for rebirth. The important thing is not to avoid collapse, but the courage and wisdom to rebuild on the ruins. Catherine watched Jimmy's profile, seeing something she had never noticed before. A quiet strength, a serenity that can only be obtained after surviving a storm. She realized that true strength is not never falling, but being able to get up after falling and doing so more firmly. "Next week we meet with the bank to discuss the financing for the new project," she said, bringing the conversation back to practical matters. "Do you have any ideas?" Jimmy turned to her with a smile. "I think we should show them why combining art and architecture is a win-win business model. Not just building buildings, but creating spaces where people's lives are enriched through art." Catherine nodded, and they began to discuss the project details. The sky was still gray, but their future was full of possibilities. After experiencing betrayal and reconstruction, they had found a new balance, a collaborative relationship based on mutual respect and shared values. This is not a story about perfect revenge, nor a fairy tale about romantic love. It's a real story about finding oneself in the ruins and growing through pain. Jimmy and Catherine lost their former lives, but they gained a new perspective and strength. They understood that sometimes, only when the old structures are demolished can new, more solid foundations be established. Under the eternal gray sky, they began their journey of reconstruction. not for revenge, but for rebirth, not for the past, but for the future, because they understood that true power is not in destroying, but in creating, not in hating, but in transcending hatred and finding new possibilities.